Hey gang, hope you had a good weekend. It was a mega one for me, spent in God's country, otherwise known as Queensland. Lots of mates, lots of friends, lots of family. It was awesome to see everyone, and back in the man cave here this evening. So how did you spend Australia Day? Now, I've got to say, there is one place in Australia that I think does Australia Day, or in fact any public holiday, better than anywhere else in the country. It's Darwin. Now, you know how much we love Darwin. Remember, on your bucket list, July the 1st, Territory Day, where you can let off fireworks, just like we did for the Our Town last year, and it was awesome. But the way they do Australia Day, and I wanted to mention Darwin because, of course, the Northern Territory is a significant Indigenous population. Their view of how to spend the day, yes, they recognise the past of the country via the smoking ceremonies and everything else that was required prior to the start of a fun run when thousands of people got involved in that, dressed up in the Australian flag or not. They were there, they were proud, they were hanging out, they were enjoying the freedom. That is a place that, don't forget, was actually bombed during a world war, actually saw conflict in a world war. And after that, there are plenty of people who hopped in the ute and went down to the local racetrack for the ute muster. Australian flags everywhere, a recognition of our difficult past, our shared present, and the awesomeness of the future. But if nothing else, just an opportunity to hang out with your mate. Now, in Darwin, there's not an awful lot of people who are from Darwin. Your mate is always from somewhere else. It's kind of a mini metaphor for how our country works. There are people who have been there for almost their whole life. The people that have been there just in the past couple of years, but they all get together on Australia Day and they find their own way to hang out. Now, you don't need an official event or venue or special ceremony to feel part of this country. To feel part of this country is to safely move amongst it, to be able to meet friends, to, dare I say, have mates who've been here forever, or the ones that you've just met who've come in from somewhere else. That's what I've always talked about when it comes to Australia Day. But I want to show you some of the stuff that wasn't on the news because, of course, the news, it's full of the woco journos and they've got to do the Invasion Day, Invasion Day, Invasion Day. A couple of people had a barbecue. Invasion Day, you know why. Well, we've talked all this year about Fairfield. We went out to Fairfield at the end of last week to go and chat to how locals felt about it. And this is a place where 80%, 79% of people in that city, they speak something other than English at home. They saw the importance of the day. They're represented in the parliament by what I think is going to be the future of many ethnically diverse electorates in Australia, regardless, most of them held by Labor, some by the Coalition. But people who want someone who has lived their life to be their representative. Remember, this was the place that Christina Keneally thought she could parachute herself into because they always vote Labor, and she'd eventually become a minister and then one day a Prime Minister. But the locals said, no, not interested in all of that. Instead, let's celebrate someone who's like us, and that's the beautiful Di Lee. Now, Di Lee, in her maiden speech to Parliament, she had that stunning outfit that was the Australian flag. Well, she brought it back out of the cupboard and wore it on Australia Day, celebrating with the local people who win local awards, who are not famous, and welcoming the people who are coming to this country. That's what I love about Australia Day, and I talk about it every year. And I hope that you had a wonderful time, be it if you were somebody who was honoured in the national awards or was nominated in the local awards or just spent time with the people who will be there for you forever, and that is your family. I hope you had a great Australia Day, no matter where you are in the country, but especially big shout out to our mates in Darwin. So yeah, okay, I'll talk about the Invasion Day thing, but I want to talk about it through a slightly different way than most people talk about this stuff. Now, yes, of course, there were thousands of people who turned up to these rallies. They get the bulk of the media attention now. These are the people who big corporates are scared of because they might launch a screaming fit at them on Twitter if they celebrate the National Day. Now, obviously, I can't tell you what every person was thinking in the crowd, but the signs were pretty obvious, which was, among other things, to unsettle the colony, which, of course, is the logical extension of the always was, always will be business. The twist this year, was that the Palestinian flag was just as prominent as the Indigenous flag in many protests, including the one out the front of our Parliament House. And plenty of people had fiery speeches, and they were all covered at great length on taxpayer television.
We're marching for a black future. We're marching for redemption from a failed referendum. We're demanding that White Australia come to the table and actually engage with us in authentic ways.
Issues of poor healthcare, land rights and youth incarceration all featuring in speeches.
A lot of us are born into racism. That's the reality. A lot of us are born into poverty. That's the reality. But this government, they criminalise poverty.
Now, you will constantly hear about how these protests are growing by the year, but they're basically the same number they have been for the past 5 years or so. But you should also pay attention to the signs that are at these protests. Now, whatever the organisers say, there's always a sign that's being held up for the Communist Party or the Socialist Alliance. And the reality is that while I do not doubt the passion and the want for dramatic change that these people represent, it's obviously not true that it is the majority percentage view of Australians. Every poll tells us about 30% are hardcore on change the date. I would imagine the numbers get a little bit lower when we're talking about unsettle the colony, whatever the hell that means. But never forget this. When you see protests like this or groups that are demanding people move away via sponsors, or big corporates are being inundated with letters, in a country of 27 million people, 1.9 million people vote Green. I would suggest the extreme number of people at these rallies would vote Green because they agree with their worldview. But remember, politically, that's at best somewhere between 10 and maybe 12% of the voting population. Now, that doesn't mean that they should be ignored, but it shouldn't mean that they reflect some majority. The majority of Australians went about their business quietly on the weekend, but the media is not interested in covering going about your business quietly. The politicians do not respond to going about your business quietly. Instead, they think that loud noises coming from large groups of people must be the front end of the operation, and there's millions of people behind them. The reality is there's not. We saw that last year when 60-40 was yes and it turned into 60-40 no. Now, again, I do not ignore the history of this country, the need to teach it in our schools, all of that stuff. But you do notice that when Alice Springs won't change the date and Darwin won't change the date, but a woke council in Melbourne or New South Wales, or if the Greens get control of Brisbane City, they'll do something. And that's democracy. If that's who people vote for, fair enough. But the majority of Australians don't feel there's any need to change. Not because they want to insult the Indigenous community, but because they want to say, hey, we get what's the past. But see, in front of us, there's nothing marked on the calendar. There's nothing in the diary. There's nothing in the journal. So let's all do it together and walk in the right direction, which is to take care of all of us, no matter whether we've been here forever, a long time, or a few months.